Hi there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz will join us in a moment. Here's what we're looking at.
It's no secret that the Midwest is key to holding the White House.
For the first time in 28 years, Chicago will host the Democratic National Convention. City officials reveal their plans. More discussion over whether the officer who killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo will be fired or suspended. Our Spotlight Politics team breaks down some of the challenges facing Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson.
Sacrifice is hard work equals championships.
And as the Chicago Golden Gloves amateur boxing tournament celebrates 100 years, we return to the ring with 3 past champions. And now to Paris with our top story tonight.
Brandis, one day after President Joe Biden picked Chicago to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention, city and state leaders took a victory lap on a beautiful, warm spring day that feels more like summer. Governor J.B. Pritzker took today as an opportunity to make the case for his hometown.
We are an ideal backdrop here in Chicago.
WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon breaks down what it means that the biggest party for Democrats comes back to Chicago for the first time in 28 years. Heather, Chicago's victory was a coup for Governor J.B. Pritzker. We talked to his chief of staff on this program yesterday. Chicago beat out Atlanta, New York, Houston to land the golden egg here. So what's the backstory here? What really put the city over the top?
Well, Chicago gives Democrats a chance to shore up their blue wall, which Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. And those are the states that without winning, Biden would not be president today. So having the convention in Chicago means that voters in those states will be able to see Biden's pitch and get to see what it looks like to live in Chicago, a very blue city where its leaders have prioritized gun control, abortion access, reproductive rights, and union strength.
Kind of interesting that the leaders in those other states acknowledge Chicago as sort of like the capital of the Midwest here, Heather.
That's right.
Cohesiveness that I don't think I've seen before. So supporters say that this could inject $150 million into the local economy, which has struggled since COVID-19. But it's not going to be cheap to hold this convention. Price tag of about $100 million. So let's listen to what Governor J.B. Pritzker said about maybe footing the bill if it comes up short.
Me personally, what I guaranteed is that I and the committee that we put together will work extraordinarily hard to raise all of the dollars necessary.
So, Heather, we know that Pritzker is very independently wealthy through his family and through his own work. Is this one of the reasons why Chicago got the convention?
It is not a negative that the most powerful Democrat in Illinois just happens to be a billionaire and is devoted to making this convention a success. So there's no doubt that having a billionaire wanting it to be a success is a great backup plan, especially in anticipation of a fierce 2024 fight against whoever the Republican nominee is.
Maybe the DNC taking out a policy on the Pritzker insurance plan there, Heather. All right, so standing next to the governor today, not only Mayor Lightfoot, which we should mention worked very hard over the last couple of years to help land this bid, but Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson, who will take office in about a month. So let's talk about his reaction to winning this bid.
So I'm obviously Steve Kerr today, you all. So I took the final shot. Here we are, Chicago.
All right, that's a reference to the NBA Finals, I think, against Utah, where Jordan, drew the triple team, threw it out to Steve Kerr, who landed the shot. So was it kind of awkward with Lightfoot and Johnson on stage there?
It was awkward. You could tell that Lori Lightfoot really saw this convention as sort of being something that she could bring to Chicago and then preside over. That's not what's going to happen. It will be Brandon Johnson who steps into the national political spotlight to preside over this convention. And if its outcome is anything like the 1996 convention, it has the power to transform Chicago because, of course, after the 96 convention, the West Loop and the Fulton Martin district transformed from a meat-packing place into a hip, hot, happening, red-hot real estate market. So there's no telling what mark this convention will live on the city.
Yeah, the thing that ended, though, after the 96 convention, it seemed, was the Macarena.
Yes, thankfully, no Macarena at this convention.
We'll see what the dance is this time around. All right, Heather, thank you very much, and you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now back to Brandis for more of today's top stories.
In Paris, a shelter-in-place order for Northwestern University campus in Evanston has just been lifted. Earlier tonight, a safety advisory from the university said Evanston police are searching for 4 suspects involved in a shooting that left 2 people injured just before 8:30 tonight. It happened at Clark Street Beach, just south of campus. The university says the suspects were last seen heading north on Sheridan Road in a sedan. Police now say they are confident that the suspects are no longer in the area. Illinois is getting more than $67 million from e-cigarette maker Juul in a settlement over its marketing tactics.
As important as money is to hold bad actors accountable, and $67.6 million will be coming to the state of Illinois, changing conduct is more so, particularly with this industry.
Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, along with 5 other states and the District of Columbia, sued the company, claiming it inappropriately marketed its product as a smoking cessation device. Plaintiffs claimed instead Juul products served as a gateway to cigarette use for young people. The total settlement amount is $462 million. Faculty at yet another Illinois public university could soon be joining the picket lines. WTTW News has learned that Northeastern Illinois University union members are taking a strike authorization vote today. If approved, they would join faculty at Chicago State, Governor State, and Eastern Illinois University on strike. NEIU has suffered from financial difficulties and dwindling enrollment, as well as changeover on its board of trustees, who recently voted to let go of university president Gloria Gibson. The results of the vote are expected tomorrow. Nearly 24 schools across Illinois received threats over the phone today. Thing is, they were all fake, part of a so-called swatting effort. That means there was a coordinated campaign to call schools and falsely allege active shooter situations. The calls went to schools in Chicago, Cook County, DuPage County, and a bunch of counties downstate. The Illinois State Police say there were, as of this afternoon, no credible threats to any of these schools. Up next, to fire or suspend the officer who killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo? What goes into that decision right after this?
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
What happens when the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, the Police Board President, and interim Chicago Police Superintendent Eric Carter agree that the officer who shot 13-year-old Adam Toledo should be fired? Well, it's not that clear, because former Police Superintendent David Brown said Officer Eric Stillman should only be suspended for 5 days. Here to unravel some of the confusion is Sharon Fairley, professor at the University of Chicago Law School, former federal prosecutor, and the former head of the Independent Police Review Authority, or IPRA. She also created the oversight agency, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, now known as COPA, which replaced IPRA. Welcome back, Sharon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Civilian Office of Police Accountability, which you led, of course, recommended that Officer Stillman be fired. First, quickly walk us through that process that COPA does when an officer kills someone.
Right. So when one of these incidents occurs, the first thing that happens is the agency sends a team of investigators that respond to the scene of the incident to start the investigatory process, which includes overseeing the collection of evidence. And then there's a full investigation that's independent from the police department that happens from there, interviewing witnesses, and then ultimately interviewing the officers, collecting reports, and just conducting a full investigation to try to understand what really happened.
So, as we said, both COPA and the police board president recommended that Officer Stillman be fired for killing Adam Toledo, but former Superintendent David Brown recommended just a 5-day suspension. How does the superintendent review these cases, and how could, 2 superintendents arrive at very different punishments?
Right. So the way the process works is when COPA completes its investigation, they come up with what their findings are and their recommendations are, and they submit those, and that goes to the police department, to the superintendent in a case that's as serious as this. The superintendent then has an opportunity to review COPA's assessment and decide if he agrees or not. If he or she doesn't agree, then what happens is there's a process by which the chief administrator of COPA and the superintendent have to try to see if they can come to some resolution of the case together. And if they can't, then the matter is referred to a single member of the Chicago Police Board, who then determines whether or not they take COPA's view, in other words, that the case should proceed on to a full hearing before the police board, or if they agree with the superintendent's view on the punishment, in which case that punishment would be imposed.
So there's this interim Chicago police superintendent, of course, Eric Carter, who recommended that that the officer be fired. He agreed with the police board. What happens when you have these conflicting recommendations?
Yeah, so now that he has agreed, the formal charges against the officer have been filed, and the case is going to occur before the Chicago Police Board. So at this point, there will be a full hearing at which the officer has the opportunity to explain his side of the story and present evidence. It's very much like a trial you would see, where evidence is presented, witnesses come and testify. Those proceedings are recorded, and then the police board reviews the testimony and makes its determination. So that's what's going to happen from here.
And based on that, if the police board has already recommended firing, what's the likelihood that after a hearing they make a different recommendation?
Well, it's possible because there are a couple reasons. So first of all, there was only one person from the police board who expressed that point of view when the matter was referred to resolve the disagreement between COPA and the superintendent. Now you have a review of the full board, which when it's fully constituted, it's 9 people. And they will be evaluating the evidence. And then also they will be reacting to the actual evidence that's presented at the hearing, as opposed to the single member who was just given a report to review and a summary of the evidence. They will actually be hearing and seeing witnesses testify and looking at the evidence. And so it is possible that they may differ in their opinion than the single person who actually reviewed the case to resolve the discrepancy.
Got it. And we've got about 20 seconds, but what typically happens with officers who are facing disciplinary matters? This shooting happened 2 years ago. Where has Officer Stillman been all this time?
Well, it depends on the nature of the charges. Some officers, once an incident that's serious like this occurs, then the superintendent will do what's called stripping of them of their powers. So they aren't actually doing actual police work because they aren't allowed to. For less serious offenses, then people would continue in the job. But for something like this, it's likely that his powers have been stripped.
Okay, Sharon Fairley, thanks for explaining it to us as always. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this. Prosecution rests its case in the bribery trial of the so-called ComEd 4. The challenges facing Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson, and of course, Chicago is named to host the DNC in 2024. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, Paris Schutz, of course. So, Paris, prosecution rested its case today, and we learned that at least one of the ComEd 4 is expected to testify in their own defense. Where does this trial stand?
Yeah, that would be former CEO Anne Pramaggiore, but where it stands right now is weeks of testimony, dozens of witnesses, phone and video recordings that prosecutors hope peeled back the curtain on this alleged scheme from ComEd through intermediaries of Mike Madigan to reward Madigan allies with no-work jobs in exchange for Madigan pushing this favorable legislation that netted the company ultimately about $2 billion. Yesterday, you heard from a longtime Madigan insider on the stand, Ed Moody, who admitted to as much, said he got checks from ComEd but never did work for them. He knew that the person he was working for was Mike Madigan. So now the question is, yes, but does that cross the line into bribery? And the defense will poke holes, especially on behalf of the CEO, Anne Pramaggiore. Like, is there a smoking gun where she said, hey, you passed this legislation for us and we're going to pay your guys? I don't know if that exists, but the thing that's working in the prosecution's favor the most is the fact that the company, ComEd, already admitted guilt to bribery in a deferred prosecution agreement.
And I think something else that could help them is just the conversations. When you hear that, it just sounds crass. And remember, this is a jury. Yes, they have a task, they have a specific ask, but when you hear some of that talk, I think it's going to make your average voter, your average resident say, what? These are the people in charge? This is the sort of conversations they were having? That also may well work in the prosecution's favor, at least I would think so.
Amanda, how is it that despite this high-profile trial, Illinois Democrats don't seem to have, paid any sort of price for, what appears to be years, if not decades, of political corruption
Like none at all, Brandis. And I mean, in fact, their majorities in the House are even greater than they were under Madigan. But a lot of that is due to the structure that Madigan set up, a lot of the staff that Madigan had who are still around. So I think that is a very reasonable question to which I don't have a great answer. There are a lot of possibilities. There is the fact that the Democrats were in charge, drew the map legislatively, so you have some gerrymandered districts. I think that there is sort of just maybe a blanket acceptance by Illinoisans that, well, this is how it works, that nothing that we're hearing is really all that surprising. I think there's also the fact that you had a Republican Party at this time that was really, really wounded because of former Governor Bruce Rauner, not at all beloved in Illinois. He took the blame for that budget impasse. Oh, and also President Donald Trump. So a lot of the more moderates in Illinois and suburban voters who might have considered themselves GOP leaning are staying very far away from the party, as we've seen in a lot of results.
So
there's a lot of reasons for that.
A lot of these Democratic members jumping off of the Madigan Titanic, you know, just as the iceberg hits in. Madigan,
yes.
who we never knew him. What are you talking about? And they were able to sort of get that quote-unquote stench off of themselves and say, that's him.
Despite the fact,
that's
by
him,
the way,
not
that
us.
the Speaker of the House was, I'm not going to say handpicked, but virtually so, definitely lifted up, mentored by and lifted up as sort of Madigan's choice. So yes, you had some Democrats stepping away, but not many.
The teachers union, which is now the center of power here, they had an alignment with Madigan as well.
A lot of folks did.
So, Heather, you were at the press conference about the DNC being announced coming to Chicago 2024, as we've said plenty here on this show. How significant is the fact that this will be the first convention in Chicago without the involvement of former Speaker Mike Madigan or a Daley?
It's huge. What Governor Pritzker hopes is that this showcases the new Illinois Democratic Party, free of Daleys, free of Madigans, a new era, a very new mayor will be at the center of the spotlight. And I think it's really hard to overstate the level of control that Michael Madigan exercised over delegates to these conventions. And it's a little bit in the woods and in the weeds for people, but these are the people who make up sort of the infrastructure of each party. And so if you get the chance to run to be a delegate, that becomes part of the infrastructure. Madigan ran that infrastructure, and now that infrastructure has to be rebuilt, and, oh, well, we're going to do it on a national stage. No small feat.
Maybe that's one of the reasons Pritzker is so ebullient, as his chief of staff said yesterday, because he desperately wants to run this party, to be the head honcho. And it hasn't worked out.
I think, not just Illinois.
But he wants to run the party in Illinois. It hasn't worked out exactly in his favor always, and he's starting to kind of gain that power of the party. This is his chance to say, you're in my hometown, in my state, and also I run this thing.
Absolutely.
Heather, what's that process going to look like?
Well, it's going to be really difficult, right? Because we did get some questions today. Well, how is Chicago going to make sure that this convention does not sweep out unhoused people? How are the city going to be ensuring that these benefits of the convention benefits the whole city and not just downtown in the West Loop, which is what happened with the 1996 convention? So Brandon Johnson has to do all of that while sort of creating this new vision of public safety that he has promised. Again, no small feat.
Well, and by the way,
a brand new mayor.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say also, while public safety is going to be center stage, you better believe that, speaking of Republican Party, they're very weakened, but not nationally. They're going to be focusing on Chicago, and we saw President Trump constantly do, as sort of this city of violence. And so that is going to be something that all eyes are on, particularly as we're looking at, as Heather noted, Johnson fulfilling his public safety pledges. As that comes up against, you're going to need police officers. Yes, there will be help from, the Secret Service and from other law enforcement units throughout Illinois and elsewhere. But still, these two issues are really sort of butting up against one another.
So, Heather, Mayor-elect Johnson naming his transition team today. Who are some of these folks? What do we know about them?
Well, they have deep ties to the Service Employee International Union, which shouldn't surprise anybody because that was the one of two big unions, progressive unions, that got behind Johnson's campaign. The name that really stuck out to me was Amisha Patel, who ran the Grassroots Alliance. And back in 2017, she sued the city on behalf of the Grassroots Alliance over the giant subsidy for the Lincoln Yards development. And I think that in and of itself symbolizes how far we've come to replace Lori Lightfoot, who campaigned against Lincoln Yards but then supported Lincoln Yards, to basically have the senior advisor to the mayor-elect to be somebody who went so far as to sue the city because she just found the deal so abhorrent. just a massive sea change in politics.
Well, and there's also, I think, what's missing from the team. There's who's on it and all these union leaders, and then there's who isn't, and that's where you look at any big names in business. Is that surprising? Not particularly, given who brought Johnson to the mayor's office. And yet, in terms of, again, as we've just been talking about, and as sort of there's this pressure in terms of balancing the interests of neighborhoods that is clearly near and dear to Johnson's heart, with also the interest of a downtown that needs to thrive, well, there you go. They're not part of that team.
So we've got about 30 seconds left, Paris. Obviously, one of the big decisions that lies ahead for Johnson is going to be picking that police superintendent. What do we know about where that process is, and obviously how important it is that he gets it right?
Well, the process is kicked off with community hearings from the new Community Commission of Civilians that's going to basically lead the search, pick 3 candidates. Brandon Johnson has said, I think, to some extent, that someone from within the CPD is probably going to have the inside track. There needs to be some stability there, and it's going to be a delicate balance here to sort of win the trust of the police department, win the trust of the community, and bridge some gaps here. Because you have a guy like John Catanzaro from the FOP saying, "Hey, 1,000 people are going to quit." I don't think that's going to happen, but certainly there is some skepticism, let's say, in the rank and file of the police department. What is this new mayor really going to be about?
And by the way, that commission headed by somebody else with ties to SEIU.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we naming names before we go?
So there was a lot of people at the meeting last night urging Ernest Cato to come back into the Chicago Police Department. He retired, and he, seems to sort of have at least some sort of grassroots support, which is an interesting wrinkle to all of this.
All right, more to come. That's Spotlight. Thanks, Amanda Heather Paris. Up next, Chicago Golden Gloves champions from the past look back at their careers as the tournament celebrates 100 years.
Did you know that before Michael Flatley was Lord of the Dance, he was Lord of the Ring? Boxing ring, that is. In 1975, the Riverdance star won the middleweight division of the Chicago Golden Gloves amateur boxing tournament, recording 5 knockout victories. And he was one of many Chicago kids who found success inside and outside the ropes, thanks in part to the Golden Gloves, which celebrates its centennial this year. Producer Erica Gunderson went ringside with 3 past champions for a look back at the tournament's legacy here in Chicago.
Boxing saved my life.
Retired boxer and coach Frank Smith says he began boxing as a child at the behest of his mother, who decided he needed an activity to keep him out of trouble.
She took me up to Mr. Ferguson, which was the boxing coach at Wentworth Gardens facility. Trust me, it worked, because I could have went the other way.
That training kicked off his career as a champion in the Chicago Golden Gloves amateur boxing tournament. In 1973, Smith won the Golden Gloves flyweight title. In 74, he won the bantamweight title. And in 75, as a 125-pound 18-year-old,
I was this little skinny kid, when I take off my robe, everybody in the audience, you can hear them, all saying this little skinny kid gonna get his butt whooped.
That little skinny kid won that bout to become the first fighter in Chicago Golden Gloves history to win 3 titles in 3 years in 3 different weight classes. Since the tournament crowned its first champions in 1923, Chicago Golden Gloves has seen greats like Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, and David Diaz step inside its rings. But its greatest legacy might be in the hundreds of young men who, like Frank Smith, found purpose and direction in the sport over the past 100 years. Retired boxing referee Tim Adams learned about his own ties to that legacy as a child when a stranger stopped by his home and told stories about his father, 1943 Golden Gloves champion George Adams.
He had so many good things to say about my father. It was just unbelievable. And I'm sitting there sucking all this in, and in the time I'm telling myself, I think I want to be a Golden Gloves champion.
Adams went on to win the Golden Gloves championship himself in 1972. In 1973, Adams won the Golden Gloves again, as well as the Chicago Park District and CYO titles, also known as the Triple Crown. Cleaning industry executive Jorge Pacheco says he got hooked on boxing as a teenager with a couple of extra pounds, fighting an older opponent.
We start fighting, and he comes out and he just starts wailing on me. And then the punches started getting lighter and lighter. And I look up, and the guy's exhausted. And I said, it's my turn. So I just start beating this guy, and then the crowd's getting into it, and everybody starts cheering. Gordito, 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 gordito. So like for 2 rounds, I'm beating this guy up, and they're going crazy. People are loving it.
Pacheco went on to win 3 Golden Gloves titles in 1997, 98, and 99. This year, Pacheco, Smith, and Adams will be inducted into the Golden Gloves Hall of Fame as the tournament marks a century of molding young men, fostering community pride, and cementing Chicago's reputation as a boxing town. And though all 3 men hung up their Golden Gloves long ago, they still look at their boxing days as a golden time.
Boxing, I owe my life to boxing.
It made you feel like you were somebody. You a champion.
It's humbling, you know, but it's also gratifying. Yes, it's in my blood.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Jorge Pacheco will be honored by the Chicago Golden Gloves tomorrow, and Frank Smith and Tim Adams on Friday. And the 100th Golden Gloves Tournament Championship bouts take place beginning tonight through Friday at Cicero Stadium.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. For all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services. Thursday nights are getting mysterious. Follow these detectives as they solve crimes from the UK to the Spanish Isles. First, Agatha Christie's Poirot. Then, The Coroner. Followed by The Mallorca Files. Thursday nights on WTTW.
I'm Scott Yu. Come with me to hear the hauntingly beautiful music of Robert Schumann. Unappreciated in his lifetime due to mental illness.
Bipolar.
Now hear this, Schumann, Genius and Madness on Great Performances.
Friday at 8 on WTTW.
You could drive off on your next adventure behind the wheel of the 2023 WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes Grand Prize. An all-new 2024 Subaru Forester